Happy birthday to the hugely talented writer, producer, director M. Night Shyamalan. Today he turns 54.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday evening here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today is M. Night Shyamalan's 54th birthday. He is as interesting a filmmaker, a writer, producer, director, as anyone to come along in the last at least 3 decades. Now, his first film, which came out in 1992, called Praying with Anger, I worked with a guy who helped him find distribution for that project. It didn't get a particularly wide distribution, very limited, but there was one person that I kind of had in common, a sort of mutual friend, if you will. Shyamalan is such an extraordinary talent that, by any metric, if you just look at his filmography, even with having, I would say, a substantial number of misses, he still had a lot of really good, high-quality movies. And even some of his misses, you get the feeling that he dared to be great, that he swung for the fences, that he went for it, even if people were telling him, we don't know if this is going to work. And filmmaking is a collaborative art, a collaborative process. Sometimes you can have the best of intentions, and maybe you just weren't meant to make this particular project at a certain time. Or maybe you listened to the wrong person. Maybe you took the wrong notes to heart and ignored the ones that would have really helped to get your script into its final form. These are things that anybody who writes, anybody who has any creative impetus, it's so difficult. I don't care how successful, or if you're just somebody who wrote something for their partner, a friend to read. Nobody likes to be criticized. No one likes to be told that their work that they've worked so hard on is anything less than spectacular. And some people deal with it better than others. But just from a broad perspective, there are people, even right now, in the movie business who, for example, don't have to have any particular pass-through of studio executives. In other words, if Steven Spielberg shepherds his own project through the system, he doesn't have anybody checking him back. He doesn't have anybody saying, Steven, this script needs more work, or ordering him to go through the test screening process. And Spielberg has talked about this, not with regards to M. Night Shyamalan, but in his own career, and the double-edged sword of having Final Cut and having the level of clout. And Spielberg has had this level of clout for almost 3 decades, where if he doesn't want to test screen a film, he doesn't have to. And the issue is sometimes you really do need a little bit of help. You have a project that may one day have the potential for greatness, but it's not quite there. In the case of M. Night Shyamalan, as a very young man and young filmmaker, he did a film in, I think it was about 1997, with, of all people, Rosie O'Donnell, called Wide Awake. And it was a movie that was an interesting film which got some middling reviews, but then there were certain critics that really appreciated it because it was a film that dealt with religion and took it seriously. And it showed people of faith who were not unhappy people. And that's not something that I would have necessarily ever pondered. But there are a lot of films, like there had been the movie called Priest a couple of years earlier, where every frame is filled with tension and everything is so fraught and everyone is miserable. I remember it was Roger Ebert, the late great Pulitzer Prize winning film critic. I don't know that he unabashedly loved the film, but he specifically mentioned this film has a really favorable representation of religion and not necessarily in the way you would expect. So already, Shyamalan was showing a willingness to do things a little bit differently. Now, right around the same time, he wrote a screenplay for what became, to this day, his biggest success critically and commercially, The Sixth Sense. But Shyamalan wrote another screenplay called Labor of Love. And Hollywood is overstuffed with incredibly talented writers who have written screenplays which sold and made them a lot of money, but for one reason or another, never see the light of production. They just never get made. And that's why when you have a film on the so-called blacklist, where it's kind of acknowledged and understood that just about everyone who has read such and such a screenplay came away saying something to the effect of, this is an absolute masterpiece, too bad it'll never get made. And I've discussed a couple of those films when they were screenplays, Total Recall being one that ended up being produced. They said, well, this is never going to be made into a movie. You can't do it. Jacob's Ladder was another one. It took Adrian Lyne to kind of crack the screenplay in such a way and say, no, we can mount this production. It's not going to be easy, but we can do it and make it accessible enough where this is not just a great read, this can be a great cinematic story. And another one of those kind of blacklist from the 80s, which ended up becoming a terrific film, At Close Range, the film with Sean Penn and I think his brother Chris Penn, and a very scary Christopher Walken. Madonna, one of her early famous hits, Live to Tell. But that was another project that people said, this is never going to get made. No chance. River's Edge was another one, same year, 1986. Very young Crispin Glover and a really young Keanu Reeves, along with Dennis Hopper. So there are certain projects everybody loves, and it just never gets made. It's Hollywood. These things don't always make sense, but M. Night Shyamalan wrote a screenplay called Labor of Love, which I remember reading about before he became this huge thing, Oscar-nominated filmmaker for The Sixth Sense. I mean, what incredible acclaim and what an amazing splash he made, his first, real big sort of commercial film. But people were already talking about Labor of Love, and it was two things at once. This is incredible. This is never going to get made. And having something like that, an experience like that, and bear in mind, I understand totally that from a certain point of view, you're in a creative business, the amount of hours you put in has nothing to do with how much money you make coming back, it's all of that. And you could say, hey bro, I get it. There's frustration, but the guy made 700,000, 800,000. And as the process was moving forth, where at various points it looked like it might get made, he was still getting paid. Yes. So no financial worries. That's terrific. But when you are in it, when you are a creative animal, as they say, it's not like being a playwright where you can just mount your own production. You have a theater, you put your play on. When you put so much of yourself into something like that, and you have the talent to do it, and it just doesn't happen, it's devastating. And that can tilt the way that you deal with people within the business for the rest of your career. It doesn't mean that you're bitter, or in the case of M. Night, he's not bitter. We've seen him in interviews. He's fantastic in interviews. He's not quite as verbose as Tarantino, for example, but he is always willing to answer questions, and he never comes across as a snooty academic looking down on the masses. My perception of him has always been, yes, he thinks he's good. He's not, going to tell us, well, I got lucky, I suck. No, he knows that he can do it. But I feel like he really wants to entertain audiences, that there's no audience or deliberate audience alienation to his work, that he wants to surprise people, that he loves it. This is a lifeblood for him. He's not just somebody who randomly ended up doing this. He was meant to do this. So The Sixth Sense became this runaway, unbelievable success because of a twist, which the first time you see the movie, and I'm not absolutely going to spoil any of the twists in his films during this episode, I promise you. but it seems to come out of nowhere, but it doesn't come out of nowhere. You watch the film a second time and you'll see that it's actually threaded in, it's layered, it's very well done. It's not my favorite film by M. Night. It's not my favorite film. I like it a lot. I would give it 3.5 stars out of 4, or like maybe 8.5 out of 10, however you want to, quantify it. It doesn't really matter. I think it's terrific. I always tell people to see it. I will never give away the secret to someone who hasn't seen that movie. But I think his next film, I'm sorry, not his next film. His next film was Unbreakable, which is a world that he inhabited in a number of other movies. The film Glass and Split. They're all in the same kind of cinematic universe. MCU. This is the MNS, M. Night Shyamalan U, MNSU. Unbreakable I saw in theaters. It's an interesting film. Bruce Willis plays seemingly a regular guy. It's very quiet, melancholy, and meditative for a suspense film. Not really horror. It would be a stretch. It has, I guess you could say it has horror film elements, but it's more of a suspense film, and it's very slow, and it doesn't do anything like what you expect. It's a superhero origin story, and we don't realize that. If we walk in cold, we think it's just a story about a random guy. He looks like Bruce Willis because it is Bruce Willis, who survives a train crash that he couldn't have survived. And he not only survived, but he didn't have a mark on him. He was not injured. And that's impossible because the person and people sitting near him were all practically decapitated, and he just walked out without a scratch, and he's fine. No problem. A fascinating opening idea for a story. I like the movie. I don't love it. I felt it could have done more with the premise. Now, my favorite film by him, and a film that I will always defend and will always point to when people, if somebody says, hey, I saw Old and I didn't like it or whatever, give me a movie by this guy that you think I would like. I don't say The Sixth Sense first. I say Signs. Unless, obviously, if somebody can't watch a movie with Mel Gibson, fine. Then I'll say The Sixth Sense. But if we take the art for what it is, Signs is a masterpiece. It takes the basic War of the Worlds kind of story where aliens are coming, maybe they're already here, and it does something completely different with the same basic story by focusing on one family, one hurting, grieving family. A father, Mel, his brother, a phenomenal Joaquin Phoenix. And you want to talk about a guy who should have got a Best Supporting Actor nomination? Joaquin in Signs knocks it out of the park. And 2 kids. Is it Abigail Breslin? I think it's Abigail Breslin and Rory Culkin, one of Macaulay's younger brothers. And this family unit deals with the same kind of events that Tom Cruise 3 years later deals with in War of the Worlds, and 1996's Independence Day deals with. Charlie Sheen, also 96, The Arrival. It's that kind of story. Either they're here to kill us, they're already here and they're going to kill us. Can we stop them? It's one of those kinds of stories. But Signs builds suspense very subtle ways. And the thing is, some people have said that with his plot twists and some of the machinery of his plots at various films, that Shyamalan is about as subtle as a guy hitting you over the head with a bag of hammers. But in Signs, the subtlety, the fact that there are huge moments that take place almost off screen, that we're not even sure we saw what we just saw. His direction in that film, for me, is better than anything he does in The Sixth Sense. And Signs is a better film, in my opinion. And a big part of that is Gibson. Because Mel Gibson is an enormously talented and resourceful actor. And in this movie, you can see him straining to not fall back on his typical movie star mannerisms. And that's not a criticism of what made him such a big star. But it showed he wanted to do something different. And his character of Father Graham Hess, we know it's Mel, but he does something different. He reads his lines, hit the cadence, and it feel like Shyamalan got this out of him by, probably making him do a lot of extra takes to get what he wanted. But we've seen Mel in a lot of movies get the shit beat out of him and just get to within an inch of his life, whether it's Lethal Weapon, whether it's Payback, whether it's Year of Living Dangerously. But he's so believable, and Joaquin both. They don't really look like brothers. I mean, I know. But the way they both register grief, it's terrible, but it's beautiful because it feels real. It doesn't feel like they're phoning it in. So I love the movie Signs, and he was, cliche city, he was really flying high. And I remember when The Village came out, Village seemed like a great idea. And the irony of The Village is if we just say, okay, let's rate M. Night Shyamalan as far as the big plot twists, because he's all about, and has been for a lot of movies in his career, big third act reveals that, oh my God, I didn't see that coming, or something of that magnitude. I think that the twist in The Village is more outlandish and more preposterous and more jarring than anything. It's the most out of left field. And yes, you watch the movie a second time, you start to get little clues. But just as far as if you took a bunch of random people and had them absorb Shyamalan movies for the first time, ones that were advertised, big ending twist, I think The Village is the craziest of all of them. Now, the movie is only modestly successful. Cast is unbelievable. I mean, from Bryce Dallas Howard and Adrian Brody on down, William Hurt, Sigourney. It's just an absolutely spectacular cast. But when we finally got to the end and the big twist, brilliant though it may seem to be, I was let down. And Roger Ebert, my guy, we agreed wholeheartedly. I saw The Village the night that it opened. The reviews were mixed, but there were enough critics who loved it where I said, okay, it's at least going to be fair. It's not a total disaster. So Roger Ebert said, when we get to the twist, we want to go back. Not earlier in the movie. We want to go back to 2 hours earlier before we bought the ticket, and we want to buy a ticket for a different movie. I remember reading that. I was fucking dying. I mean, that's pretty funny. I didn't hate it that much, but I would give the film 2 stars out of 4. And for me, it was the first real disappointment of the movies that I had seen, because I didn't see Wide Awake and I did not see Praying with Anger. And Rosie O'Donnell, we don't really see much of her today. She occasionally pops up. There's controversy. She's arguing with someone, whatever it might be. But Rosie O'Donnell, she had a TV show, which for a time was very popular, and she made for a pretty good talk show host. She was kind of Ellen before Ellen. Her show was that kind of thing. I know that she could be, she's a Long Island native, but she was not really a contentious personality on that program. But I thought The Village was the first film I was really disappointed in by him. Even if I didn't unabashedly love Unbreakable, it was terrific for what it tried to do. I just thought that maybe it should have gone in a different direction or two. Love Samuel L. Jackson's performance in that. Man, is he good. So I mentioned earlier the idea of how difficult it is to take criticism and to take direction from other people when you are, from a filmmaking perspective at least, you're an alpha. You know what you want to do. You don't want people who are not as good at this job as you are. You don't want those people deflecting you from your path. You don't want people telling you how to make your movie. Because in the case of M. Night, by that point in his career, by the mid-2000s, it wasn't a question of him getting a project set up. He's got a deal. He presents the script that he wants to make, and let's make a movie. So what happened with Lady in the Water is that he wrote a screenplay which was not really horror, not really sci-fi. I guess you could call it a suspenseful fairy tale, but he wrote a script and he was very high in this instance on his own work, and he took it to one of the coordinating producers. I assume he was at Touchstone? No, I don't know if he was at Touchstone. But he took it to one of the top producers, and she basically told him, we really like the script. You have some terrific ideas, we see what you're going for, and there's no doubt that this can work and this can be a successful movie. The script needs a lot more, though. And this is not ready. No offense, it's not ready. Well, he thought it was ready. And he was so incensed about someone who, in his mind, well, they don't understand writing. They're not a filmmaker. They're an executive. He would never have said this out loud, but presumably this is what he was thinking, and he was trying to figure out what to do. He did not want to deal with 30 pages of notes from a number of studio executives. People who he respected, don't think he didn't. Of course he respected them. And not just because they were buddy. People at that level of the industry that at that point that he was dealing with, they didn't get there by accident. It's like people talk about, well, how did David Zaslav become the head of X? Because he was really good at his jobs before that. He didn't luck into it any more than somebody who would be in a position to tell M. Night Shyamalan in 2005, your script needs more work. And we're not talking about a quick polish. You have to radically alter this. It's got to be at least 50% different for it to have a chance to go. So he was so incensed, he jumped ship. And I believe he went to Disney from wherever he was. Not sure what the studio was, but the idea was he bounced from one studio to the other. It could have been that he went from Disney to Paramount. It's something in that ballpark. The name of the studio isn't important. What is important is he followed the great American independent filmmaker John Sayles. He did what John Sayles had done in the early 80s. When John Sayles got tired of studio people telling him what was wrong with his script. And John Sayles' quote was, when he was asked, John, you could have had a big career as a studio writer, director. Why did you go the independent route? And he said, I got tired of those motherfuckers and their fucking notes. That's what M. Night Shyamalan dealt with more than 2 decades after John Sayles jumped ship. But he didn't jump ship to independence. He went to a rival studio. And he made his movie with the always fantastic Paul Giamatti. But Lady in the Water wasn't very good. I saw it. I was very underwhelmed. Now, watching the movie, I'm not sitting there thinking, oh, I imagine that he could have made a change here and a change here. I didn't have any answers as to how it could have been better. But I thought that the story wasn't worthy of his talents, would be how I would describe it. The Village, I feel like, was a better idea for a movie. There's a lot of really good stuff in The Village. That script probably needed a little bit more work too. So unfortunately, after Lady in the Water kind of failed, he wrote a screenplay which sold for a ton of money. This was something he did outside the studio. I'm pretty sure that it was a spec script. It was called The Green Effect. And it ended up getting made, and it was called The Happening. And it was with Mark Wahlberg. And that was a film that was very polarizing. Reviews were all over the place. Most people I know who saw it didn't like it. They thought that, the story just isn't that interesting. This is absurd. And it has elements of a Todd Haynes movie from the mid-90s called Poison, where Julianne Moore plays, and that's an independent film, I should throw that out there. Julianne Moore plays a normal woman. She's a wife, she's a mom. I forgot what she does. I feel like she's in the arts in some capacity. But she's slowly dying. She's being poisoned by the environment, by fluorocarbons, like the ozone layer is almost got. But the film takes it very seriously, and she is slowly dying. The environment is killing her. Well, in The Happening, that's pretty much the entire movie. The environment is causing people to go loco, and the movie just isn't good. And I'm a big Mark Wahlberg fan. Man, I grew up, I was 17 when Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, Good Vibration, right? I Need Money. That movie was no good. So he has this string of 3 very good to spectacular films. In The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, and Signs. And then he has The Village, which a lot of people like, but it wasn't as successful as expected, and Lady in the Water, and The Happening. And then he made a movie about he did a live action adaptation of Avatar, The Last Airbender. And if we just go by the numbers, that's the worst movie he ever made. The Rotten Tomatoes score is really, really bad. And the IMDb score is bad. I don't know anybody who liked that. And I've seen some episodes of the animated show, not the one that just came out. I mean the animated show from however many years ago it was. It's pretty good. I don't know anybody who liked the movie. And then he did the film After Earth with Will and Jaden Smith. That didn't work either. It kind of, I hate to say it without spoiling it, they sidelined the wrong Smith early in the movie. And the story follows, I think, the wrong one. And that film tanked at the box office. So here you have somebody with such incredible success. And we can see how talented he is, how beautiful his frame compositions are. The painterly pictures he puts on screen for us, just gorgeous. I mean, signs, there are so many just random shots in that movie that could be a painting on the wall. This is not just, oh, he's a good writer. Any more than Quentin Tarantino is just a good writer. Now, Shyamalan is an enormous talent. But he made a bunch of bad movies. And unfortunately, the other thing is, if things start to go wrong, you do not grasp at straws, but you might take and go into a project that if you were on fire, you might, you know what, I can do better. But in the business, you're only as good as your last movie, right? Everyone's unemployed until they get another gig. And especially if you have one or two disappointments in a row, you are more likely to take on something or go with something that you're not entirely sure of because you got to keep your name out there. Maybe we can make a great movie out of this. Let's just see. It's better to make a movie than sit back and wait for something to happen. And maybe in 6 months, I still haven't even started making another movie. He made a comeback with The Visit. The Visit was another movie that didn't get great reviews, although there were some critics that said a return to form for M. Night. That's what I said after seeing it, because that movie is slow burn, suspense, and terror, and it does it perfectly. I think it's a better movie than Unbreakable, and a lot of people would disagree with me on that. But it showed that he hadn't lost his touch. He lost it when he was in his early 40s or mid 40s? Come on. But it showed that with the right material, with a solid script, and some good character actors filling in around the margins, and a story that we don't expect to go in the direction that it does, you can still hit the ball out of the park, as we like to say in baseball. Now, I wasn't enough into Unbreakable that I was desperate to see either Split or Glass. To this day, I haven't seen, sorry to say, either Split or Glass. They didn't look interesting to me. It's weird because having watched Unbreakable, I thought the character of Mr. Glass that Samuel L. Jackson played, what a great character. What a great idea for a character. The yang to Bruce Willis's yin. It's such a terrific concept. I just wasn't into it. And some people, what they told me about the movie Split kind of put me off. I said, you know what? I don't really need to see it. And by the time Glass came out, I really wasn't going to the movies anymore. Now, I had a stretch in the 2013 to 2017 era where I went to the movies fairly often. Not as much as in the 90s when I was going on average once a week. But they didn't grab me enough where I said, oh my God, I got to go see Split in theaters. Oh my God, I got to go see Glass in theaters. I did see Old, and that is the most frustrating film of his career as far as I'm concerned, because the concept, I think, is as ingenious as anything he's come up with. And I think the film it's just not good. The first half hour, incredible. The last 10 to 15 minutes, incredible. It's everything in the middle that I just don't like. And I don't think the film succeeds. Now, I saw it with my sister and a friend, and I think I liked it the least of the three of us. I was just really disappointed because when I saw the previews, I was so geeked up, and some of the early buzz was through the roof. And oh my God, I can't wait. This is going to be so good. And I walked out of the theater crushed that the film wasn't anywhere near as good as, I don't even think it's as good as The Village, honestly. but it certainly wasn't as good as The Visit, even though if you look at some of the IMDb scores, it's so tricky because everyone's different and it kind of depends what were you in the mood for on a certain day. But although I think it turned a profit and it has some good performances and some interesting actors like Rufus Sewell in a real kind of over-the-top sort of a role, I was really disappointed. I like Gail Garcia Bernal also, and I walked out of that movie, I was pretty pissed off, quite frankly. I'm like, oh man, they fucked this up. There was so much potential for a great movie here, and it 2 to 2.5 stars out of 4. And it could have been great. I think it could have been like Signs, like The Sixth Sense. It could have been that level of memorable as opposed to, it's like a near miss. Now, I haven't seen Trapped yet, the new one that he has out. I will. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to see it in theaters, but the reactions are all over the place. It seems to almost have like a 50-50. There are people saying, oh my God, yet again, a return to form. People love to say that, a return to form. And then people saying, damn, this could have been great. And it doesn't quite get all the way there. I did read that and see that on YouTube in a number of places. But I'm certainly going to go see it. But I want to talk about A Knock at the Cabin, which was a movie that I probably won't ever watch again, but that I think is probably the best movie he's made since Sixth Sense and Signs. It's better than Unbreakable for me. What he does in A Knock at the Cabin is take a fantastical story and a concept that is seemingly, again, head in the clouds. This is so dumb. This is so overwrought and absurd. And he makes it believable by casting the actors so well. And Dave Bautista, former professional wrestler, Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy and the MCU at large, Dave Bautista is incredible. He's what I remember about the film. His performance is really something to see. And that's a story of random strangers knock on a door of a particular family and offer them impossible choices. And it's the sort of thing where it's, well, if you want to live, if you want humanity to survive, you must kill this person. Sort of like, Abraham and Isaac and all. It deals with that sort of stuff. The film builds and builds. And you go from saying, okay, these people who knocked on the door are complete psychos. And by about the halfway point, you say, they're just as scared as the people they are apparently threatening. Something else is going on here. Yeah, it's really, really good. It's, to me, at least 3.5 out of 4. And so I wish that the movie Trap had gotten the across-the-board critical acclaim of films such as The Sixth Sense, but it didn't. But one of the reasons why people are always excited for his next film is it's not that he's unpredictable. I guess the quality is what's unpredictable, because we all know that he's a fantastic writer, and there's nothing wrong with his filmmaking acumen. I mean, this is a guy who was, as I said, born to do this. He was compared to Spielberg early in his career, and not by accident. He was making student films. Praying with Anger, he shot on a shoestring. He probably maxed out a bunch of credit cards. Like, this is a guy who lived for it when he was from a very young age. And I know his daughter Ishana is now a filmmaker, and she had a movie that came out, was it June? I think it was June, called The Watchers, which some people really liked. And I know everyone's going to say nepotism, but honestly, if you're going to help someone out, if you are going to give someone a leg up in the business, why not make it a family member? I can't really rag on the guy, especially because he was given such a rough time by the studio system in his early days. And maybe someday he will get to make Labor of Love. I'm telling you, there are people, you Google this, there are people in Hollywood, many of them probably won't put a name to this, who will say that is their single favorite screenplay that they've ever read. And it's still sitting on someone's shelf, metaphorically, waiting to get made, and who knows, I don't think it's ever going to get made, but maybe someday. Because there are other long gestating projects and scripts that sat around for decades, which ended up getting produced. I mean, they were going to make an adaptation of Bernard Malamud's The Natural in the 50s, and then the 60s, and then the 70s. They didn't do it until 1984. 30 years. Well, we don't know how to do it. No shit. They haven't figured out how to mount labor of love. Maybe someday. And then it really will be a labor of love that it took 20-something years, 25, 26 years to finally reach the big screen. Despite the missteps, and despite not having seen two of his bigger films, I consider myself a big fan of M. Night Shyamalan, even if we're going to say mostly on the strength of just how powerful The Sixth Sense and Signs are. Happy 54th birthday to the trailblazing, pioneering, mega-talented M. Night Shyamalan. This has been episode 270 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, or the others, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then.